Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists, sponsored by a grant from the California Arts Council. I'm Nanette McGuinness, Artistic Executive Director of Ensemble for these times. In this week's episode, we continue our Da Capo Conversations, a mini-series where we'll be giving familiar segments a topical twist. Today we revisit Ursula Kwong-Brown's and Carla Lucero's perspectives on their artistic process. Here's what Ursula Kwong-Brown had to say.
You know, this is something I've been struggling to deal with ever since I started working with electronics in college. I was at Columbia University where I studied with Tristan Murail, who was one of the founders of the spectralist movement. And so I was sort of lucky. I got to spend a lot of time at the Columbia Computer Music Center, working with a lot of people doing sort of cutting edge stuff with electronics. And I had composed, like I'd said, on paper since I was about 6 years old. So I'm like, at this point, I'm like, whatever, 20 years old. I'd spent like more than half my life writing music for instruments, and incorporating electronics just like hurt my brain for the longest time. I could not figure out how to conceptualize it, how to write it down, how to notate it. And it's been an ongoing process. Like these days, I would say I compose sometimes out of order. Like I'll play things into Logic, like a digital audio workstation, and then I'll take it back into Sibelius and I'll do that. And then sometimes I'll take it back into Logic and play again. And it's all sort of a mishmash of however each project wants to go. One thing that's great working with my husband is that he's like very good with electronics, and so he's always encouraging me to like start with what you want to hear and figure out how you want to do it later, because often there are many ways to do something.
Sure.
And so to not worry about that in the beginning is very liberating. To start with like, okay, I want this viola to have this like amazing decay and like this reverb and like this, and there's different ways to do it. Like this piece, Reflections on Rothko, for viola and electronics, that's been done a lot using something called Mainstage in Logic. Like last week, we just built a patch to do it in Ableton for a violinist in Chicago who performs with that. And I never even occurred to me you could do it that way. But, people come asking for things and you realize that, yeah, it's perfectly possible to do it that way. And someone else actually did it with hardware, like on a mixer, like no software at all. And that was something that was totally new to me, is doing it all on hardware. So I guess with each project, it's different, you just sort of try to think of the sound world that you're going for and then notate it as clearly as you can. And one thing about electronics is that as the programs develop, there's always going to be new solutions to how to do things.
Right.
And so you basically just have to be clear as you can with the intentions, and then be open to different ways for people to problem solve that,
Sure. Yeah, it sounds like your compositional process, if I understood correctly, that it's mostly you're working with electroacoustic at this point, and that you're imagining the sound world you want, that you're not doing a lot of straight acoustic stuff.
I am doing a lot of straight acoustic stuff too. So I just wrote this like 25-minute requiem that's for, choir and piano. And it's I wrote actually a version. It started out as a version for like synth and solo voice with me, like just recording myself like 10
Right.
times over in layers. Right. And as I did this, I was like, this is actually a choral piece,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I having sung in choirs like my whole life, I guess I have an affinity for choir music.
Sure.
But no, I guess so that I mean, there are some things that you can do on like a synth, a great grand synth sound, that you can't do on a piano, right? Like it doesn't sustain forever, for instance.
Right.
But I mean, I also love things that are purely acoustic, because as a, I grew up playing chamber music, going to chamber music camp, going to Interlochen, and I love being able to just like sit down with some musicians and make music and not have to worry about like whether the, the speakers are going to work, or whether, or starting and stopping the iPhone with the measure number, like it's such a headache. Like there are times when having things purely acoustic is just the best. And I, as a musician, definitely appreciate that.
So when you're looking at the blank page of paper and you're writing either for your own desire or a commissioner has said, do what you prefer, do you just start imagining the sound you want, and then the sound comes to you, and then you realize, oh, this is going to be an acoustic piece? Or, oh, I want electronics? Or does it just evolve as the sound world evolves?
I would say that I have different sources of inspiration, and some of them just call to me, oh, that's electronic, and some of them don't. Like yesterday, I was on a plane coming back from Portland, Oregon, and I saw Mount Shasta coming through the clouds. It was beautiful. And I was like, oh my God, I have this idea. And so I pulled out my iPad. I did. I took a picture through the window. I pulled out my iPad. I was like writing these like descending lines, and I totally thought it had to be electronic. Like there was something about like the light and the shadow and the alternating, and I just heard it as like electronic sort of descending clouds of sound. But for instance, I was working on an idea for this upcoming commission for you guys, and it was a piano idea that was sort of echoing itself, and it sort of was inspired by sort of like a delay line in electronics, but it was acoustic. And I was just really hearing it as like an actual pianist echoing and sort of imitating sort of the sound of electronics, sort of like Steve Reich does, with his some of his piano music that sort of plays on the ideas of electronics, but are totally acoustic. I don't know. I guess it just depends fully on, each piece is different,
Actually, that clarified it for me a lot. Something gives you an idea and you hear it, and what you're hearing tells you where you want to go.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense.
It's just sort of like some colors might feel like they have like sparkly silver in them, and some colors, I guess I think a lot with color when I compose, and some of them don't, right? Some of them don't have any sparkle, and you're like, okay, that's not, this is just like a burnt like orange color, that there's no silver in that one. Okay. Like it's just a different color.
That makes sense. Do you have synesthesia?
I suppose I do. I mean, if you look at my folders, like it's funny, because you have so many ideas that come to you, and you don't know how to organize them, right? And so I have them by color often, like red and blue and yellow, and so I'll have like blue 11 or something, but I'll know at least what the sound world is from the color.
That's fascinating. Thank you for going into it in more depth on that. For our listeners who might not know some of the terms you use, could you tell people what the spectralist movement is?
Oh yeah, so Tristan Murail and Gerald Grisset were these French composers who made sort of spectrograms. Like they took recordings, audio recordings, and they looked at them with like frequency in the sort of the y-axis, and like time, the x-axis, and you could see, if you analyze like say a bell, the overtones that it makes, and you could compose something based on those complex overtones. And it would be different for like a piano, which has a very flattened spectrum, versus like a clarinet, which has like a lot of even partials, versus an oboe, which is like, or a human voice, which has a very strong formant in a certain range. And so they compose music sort of like loosely inspired by this stuff. And for me, it was especially useful because I was analyzing these frog songs, and and I was able to pull them in and be like, hey, Tristan, like, can you look at my frog song and be like, this is weird, right? Like they're singing these perfect fourths. Like, have you ever seen this? And he's like, no. It's pretty strange for an animal to sing a harmonic interval, like two simultaneous pitches, not melodic, right?
Right.
Which is more normal. So that's spectralism. They would do things like he had a little keyboard that he would detune to quarter tones and place little rocks on it so that he could have these very, precise chords with these very precise harmonics that were flat or sharp. That was the world that he came from. Yeah.
For those who aren't as electronically trained, you want to just briefly, Logic and Ableton.
Right. So Logic is a digital audio workstation, and it's, you know, the traditional like time runs on the x-axis, and you know, you have a bunch of different tracks and you can record like vocals or drums or whatever you want,
right,
in layers. Ableton is sort of a mind warp if you're used to thinking that way, because it runs in loops. So you'll have like a column, and each column will be like a different instrument, different voice, and within it is a loop, and you can like run a show that way. So like each scene or part of a song will be like a row of loops. Or in the case of my viola piece, it'll be like a set of processing. So like in this row, you'll have a ton of reverb. And in the next row, like no reverb, but like 3 kinds of delays, because I have a pizzicato section and I want there to be like lots and lots of echoes, but not so much reverb. And then in the next scene, it all cut out and it's back to reverb again, you know? So it's a way of organizing time and processing.
Here's what Carla Lucero had to say.
My process is, it depends on what I'm doing. If I'm creating, co-creating the libretto,
right,
it's a completely different process. I'm writing the libretto myself. Initially it is. So I'm just going to talk about after the libretto is written, no matter if I've done it or somebody else. So what I do is I usually have a big picture of what I want. I already kind of know what the direction I'm going to go in with the music, kind of know exactly how it's going to start and how it's going to end. It's kind of, it's like a photograph in a way. And right as I'm picturing this, I'm also jotting down musical information, whether it be, you know, melodies or maybe a harmonic progression or a lot of times a rhythm, you know, just these ideas of what I'm going to do. And then I create a graph. I have one here.
We can describe it for the people listening.
Okay. So depending on the piece that I'm commissioned to write, or that I'm embarking on myself for later commission, the graph starts out, I'll show you. This is the one for Tres Mujeres de Jerusalem. So
Yes.
what this is I first start off with what you see in pencil, right? So these ideas of what the flow is, right? The scenes, what I'm envisioning, you know, that's happening with the scenes. Then after that, the information is about the orchestration. And then up here it's about density and you know, how orchestral density.
I can describe to people who aren't going to be able to see this. It is a big piece of score paper on its side, and at the bottom are notes, and then there's a line above it, and then there's more notes, and this is all in pencil. And then there are increasing wave, like a, not quite a sine wave because it's growing more like a mountain above it. And there are 3, and then there's a big cliff rising to the climax at the top. And where Carla was talking about density, there's red hatching, and then there's some crescendos and a few other descriptions.
So that was for Tres Mujeres. This one is for touch. So you can see this one I did differently. And you could go ahead and describe it and then I'll explain.
Okay, so instead of score paper, this is now looks like poster board, and there are 3 chunks, one marked exposition, one marked development, and one marked recap, and I can't read the rest. Oh, of somebody's love theme. And the exposition is the biggest chunk, and then development, and then the last part. And each one of those has, it looks like colored pencil, different colors and vertical blocks of different colors. This is fascinating too. That particular one has scenes written above each color and pattern. It's very pretty.
Thank you. So depending on the piece, because these are so different. The last one that I showed you with
Yeah.
all the color was
Yeah.
from touch, and I felt that it sounds almost counterintuitive, but understanding this on a different level, touch is about Helen Keller.
Right.
And so there were ideas, orchestration ideas that I had toyed with, that feel like shapes, that
Hmm.
feel like colors, trying to really express what's happening in her mind, in a very abstract way, but so that there is some consistency with that, how she's interpreting information and how she's relating to others in terms of, the world around her. um, they were more, it was more, the music is more familiar, so really kind of to be able to juxtapose these two ideas, these two worlds,
Hmm.
musical worlds, I had to be really precise,
Hmm.
how it was going to move, how it was going to flow, whether or not maybe I don't want it to flow,
Hmm. Hmm.
in some parts of it. So it really helps me with my process, compositionally and orchestrally, to try to realize these ideas. And I did this even with my first opera on actual graph paper.
Hmm.
I've this has always been my process. So after I do this, then I told you I had already like jotted down some ideas, right,
Right.
on actual manuscript paper.
The real
Hold the
deal.
right side up. Yeah. Uh, and after that, after the graph, I go back to those notes and I start to flesh out, at the piano, flesh out some of these ideas. Because actually, the first thing I need to do with opera is create a piano vocal score.
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes I'm already orchestrating in my head, right? And it's like, oh, this scene I already knew what I was going to do orchestrally, so I have to create a reduction, for this particular scene. Um,
Right.
but usually let's just say mostly it's the other way around where I'm creating the piano vocal score. So a lot of that works at the piano. And then I do what I call my refinement process. And I input some of that information into Sibelius and make notes on my regular score. And I have an assistant, a dear assistant, Spencer Keen, and he is copyist, engraver, videographer, editor, he's amazing. He's a composer himself. We've been working together long enough so that he understands, okay, um, I'm going to take this information on Sibelius and Carla's notes and like say there's some kind of pattern that's
Hmm.
happening, continue this pattern and keep these dynamics consistent here, or, you know, so that I am not bogged down time wise, so I can just
Right.
keep going.
Could you repeat his name for a second?
Spencer Keen. He's wonderful. So yeah, so that happens, and then I'm able to have something that I can deliver. It's formatted and everything, but there's a lot of back and forth that goes, on. A lot of times I will, have this raw, um not really that raw, but you know, he puts in some of the dynamics and everything, and I have it listed out. And then I get it back, and then of course I change things and develop things more.
Hmm.
And that's usually then I'm ready for him to format and create a first draft
Right.
of the piano vocal score. After that, then I go into, after a workshop, I go into orchestration. The commissioners always, the companies commissioning me always think like, oh, she's going to start orchestrating now. It's like, you know what? I started before I even, started the piano vocal score. So it's just kind of a continuation of developing the project, but orchestrally.
Right. Because you're hearing the timbres as you're composing. And so you already know how you want it to sound. The orchestration is part of the inspiration for the sound in the first place.
exactly. More and more so with each project. It seems like that's kind of happening very early on for me.
The way you were describing color and senses, are you synesthetic?
Yes, I am. And I noticed it was a very interesting way that I perceived this before knowing what it meant.
Hmm.
When I was young, I realized that certain uh, uh, colors and frequent well, I don't know how to explain this. Like like when you're watching the old TVs and then you start to get that horizontal roll,
Um,
the like the old
oh,
TV.
yes, 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 yes. You mean when
uh,
it's not really working quite right and it starts to flip?
yeah, I started to hear and there was no sound.
Interesting. You heard frequencies and sounds.
Oh yeah, it was wild. And I remember I was pretty young.
Hmm.
Remember asking my parents,
What's going on?
yeah, what are those sounds? What's happening? And they're like looking at me like, oh, and on top of this, I was dyslexic. So my parents are like, okay, we want a rebate.
That's
uh,
funny.
yeah, so it was crazy. So I knew that was happening, and then same thing with colors and I just thought it was like normal that
Yeah.
everybody processed visual information
I do
like
not. I don't see colors with music, but I've worked with a number of composers who do. And
really.
I think it must make their compositions and process greatly enriched as a result.
I don't know. I mean, it's hard, because that's the way I am, but
Yeah,
it kind of
right.
explains the graphs too.
Yes, that's what made me think of it. When you showed me your
Yeah.
graphs with the color blocks, I was like, I got a hunch here.
Uh-huh. And I feel it. I can feel it, taste it, hear it, everything. It's kind of um it evokes something in me where I'm
That's intensely
hearing
cool.
everything.
Very
Thank
cool.
you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you for listening to For Good Measures Da Capo Conversations, and a special thank you to our guests for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting about it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at www.e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible in part by a grant from the California Arts Council and generous donors like you. For Good Measures produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times and designed by Brennan Stokes, with special thanks to co-producer and audio engineer Stephanie M. Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts and tune in next week for Good Measure.